Today, we are going to learn about thesis statements and how we can write a successful thesis statement for a narrative essay. So, the first thing that we want to clear up is what is a narrative essay? So, a narrative essay is a personal story that makes a point, okay? And for this assignment, your first paper is going to be 2.5 to 3.5 pages long. So, you want to make sure that you're narrowing down that story so that it fits anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5 pages, right? If we pick a story that's too big, like a story that could fill up an entire book, that's not really going to work, okay? So a thesis statement helps you to narrow down what it is you want to say, but it also tells the reader what the point of the story is, okay? So I'm going to walk you through this step by step, and I'm also going to give you a great example with illustrations and everything to help you understand this, okay? So again, narrative essay, short story. In this case, it's a short story that makes a point, okay? So there's a couple of things that we have to keep in mind when we are building a thesis statement, okay? A thesis statement is really what any teacher or professor you've had in your life that tells you your paper needs focus. Your paper needs focus. Some people call it a focus statement, okay? A thesis statement, fix my hat here. A thesis statement is where you get that focus, okay? That's where you're taking the story and you're literally focusing it like a lens, okay? So let's take a look at a few things to think about when you're putting together a thesis statement, and then I'm going to show you an example of a thesis statement. I'm going to tell you how that thesis statement came into being. And I think through that story, you'll get a really solid idea of how to write one yourself and how to apply it to something, a story from your own life, so you can write a really awesome paper. Okay, so let's take a look over here. What we have is how to build a thesis statement. Okay, so we've got a few points that we want to keep in mind. Your thesis statement should contain two important pieces of information. Now, if you look, I have one piece of information highlighted in blue, and I have another piece of information highlighted in yellow. That's going to matter later, so let's keep that in mind. Number one, your thesis statement should tell your reader what is your paper about. In other words, what is the event? What is the experience? What is the topic that you're going to be covering today? Okay, but I think for our purposes here, saying event or experience is probably the best way to word it, okay? The second part of this is, why are you writing it? In other words, what is the point? You can see I have that highlighted in yellow, okay? So this is the part that is usually the most complicated for someone to figure out for their paper. In my experience, students struggle with that part more than they struggle with the other part, because it's easy to come up with stories from your life. I mean, we do that all the time. We tell stories from our lives to our friends and our family. Oh, last night this happened. Oh, I went to a party the other night, this happened. Oh, I went to get my driver's license the other day, and this happened, right? So I think it's easy to pull stories from your own life, okay? But try to determine what makes those stories important to you is a little bit more complicated for some people, because sometimes we learn things from our experiences, but we don't even think about what we've learned, right? So you're being put in a position here where you're going to pick a story from your life, and you've really got to consider, why am I writing about this? What is the point of this essay? Why am I writing this? Okay, so there are a few questions that you can ask yourself to figure out that second part. And again, I'm going to give you a phenomenal example to help you with this, okay? But here are some questions that you can ask in order to help figure out that second part, okay? So if you look over here, I have 5 different questions you can ask yourself. What did I learn about life? What did I realize about life? What did I come to understand about the world in a new way? How was I changed as a person? And what is my message to the reader? Okay, so these are all things that can help you figure that out. All right, so I also have a sample thesis statement right here. You can see this line that is in blue and in yellow. Okay, so what's the blue part? The night I ran into my first burning house as a firefighter. Okay, that's the story. So if we look back at the how to build a thesis statement, the part in blue says, what is your paper about? That's what the paper is about. That's the physical story, the thing that happened, the thing that has events attached to it that we're going to write about, okay? The night I ran into my first burning house as a firefighter. But then there's the yellow part, and that is the reason why you're telling the story, right? The night I realized it is good to face fear. So that's the realization. That's the lesson that was learned from this story, okay? So if we read it all together, it says, the night I ran into my first burning house as a firefighter was the night I realized it is good to face fear. Now, how did this thesis statement come about? And I think hearing the story of how this thesis statement came into existence will help you choose a story from your own life and apply a reason for telling it, okay? So many, many years ago, I was teaching an English class in person, and a student walked in and he was late. And when I say late, I mean he was like 3 weeks late. And it was like, I don't know, there was some sort of issue going on with financial aid or something, but comes into class, and at that point in time, my class was already working on these papers, these narrative essays. And he walks in and, we have our introductions, and he says, well, what are we doing? What are we working on? And I explain we're writing a narrative essay. And I said, do you have anything from your life that you could write about that would be interesting for a paper? And he said, well, I'm a firefighter. I could write about that. And I said, that sounds great. Let's see what you come up with. So he sits down at the computer and he starts typing away. Okay. After about a half hour, he's sitting there. Now he's sitting there silently. Okay. And he's not doing anything. He's just got like a block of text on the screen. Okay. And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, I don't have anything left. I don't have anything left to say. Like I ran out of ideas. So I said, well, let's see what you have here. So I sit down and I read his paper, and it's basically, I'm a firefighter. I work for this company. This is how often I'm on call. This is what we do when we get to a fire. This is what happened at a fire I went to this one time. This is what happened at another fire I went to this other time. My father was a firefighter, so I'm really glad to be picking up the baton and carrying the family legacy. And I was like, okay. I said, so the problem here is the paper lacks focus, right? We're all over the place. We're basically hearing a lot of random information about what it means to be a firefighter, but we're not focused on a story. We're not focused on a singular experience or singular event. Now, sometimes that can be a little difficult because we go through things in our lives that feel enormous and we want to tell the whole story. But we've got to remember, this is a 2.5 to 3.5 page paper. It is not an entire biography here. So I said, do you have any stories from being a firefighter that stand out, that are different than all the rest for some reason? And he said, yeah, my first fire was really different. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, I was 19 years old at the time. And he said it was my third night there. He goes, I had been working night shifts and I still hadn't been to an actual fire yet. He said, I've been through training and things like that. He goes, but I'd never actually gone to a fire yet. And he goes, in those 3 nights, he goes, some of the other firefighters, they were telling me stories, and they were like horror stories from things that they had seen over the years. He goes, and nobody knew it, but I was completely freaked out. And he said, at that point, my plan was to finish out that 3rd night, and then I was just going to quit in the morning and not come back. I just did not think it was for me. And I said, okay. I said, so what happened? And he said, well, we're all sitting around. He goes, it's really late at night. We're all sitting around playing cards. And it's quiet. And he goes, and that's a good thing. He goes, and that's what I wanted, right? Like if it's quiet at a firehouse, it means nothing's burning down anywhere. He goes, so we're sitting around playing cards. He goes, then all of a sudden the alarm goes off. And now we've all got to get up. We've all got to put our gear on. He goes, and everything happens so fast. He goes, everyone's pulling on their gear. He goes, and then we all get on the truck. Okay. So now I'm sitting on the truck and we are driving to this fire. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, like, what am I going to see when I get there? Like, are people going to be hurt? Are people going to be burned? He goes, I have no idea what to expect. He goes, so we get to the end of the street and we turn the corner and you can see this house completely burning out of control. And I said, oh man, I said, then what happened? And he said, well, we pulled up in front of the house. He goes, and we're sitting there. And he goes, and as I'm getting off the truck, I can hear two people inside screaming for help. And I said, oh man, so then what happened? And he said, well, he goes, I don't know what came over me. He goes, but all of a sudden, I wasn't as terrified anymore. He goes, and I was the first person to kick the door down. And he said, and I went into that house. And as I entered the house, I could hear those two people screaming for help. He goes, so I went through, he goes, the house is burning like crazy. He goes, I followed, my training. I went through, I found those two people and we got them out of the house and we got them to safety. And I said, that's great. I go, then what happened? And he said, well, he goes, we put out the fire. He goes, which is an experience in and of itself. But we put out the fire, and then we took some time, of course, to clean up our equipment and get ready to go back to the firehouse. So we're on our way back to the firehouse. He goes, and I'm just feeling different. And he said, when we got back to the fire station, he goes, I know this is going to sound a little messed up. He goes, but I don't mean it in a bad way. And I said, well, what is it? What is it that you want to say? And he goes, when we got back to the fire station, he goes, I kind of wished that there'd be another fire. And I said, why? And he said, don't get me wrong. He goes, I didn't want anything bad to happen or anything like that. He goes, it's simply that I had faced my fear, and because of that, I saved two people's lives. He goes, and now I've been a firefighter for the last few years. He goes, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. He's like, I love it. He goes, and I almost quit. And I said, okay, so what did you learn from that story? And he goes, I think I just learned that in life, it's good to face your fear. And I said, there it is. There it is. There is your thesis statement, right? We know what the story is. The story is that you went to your first fire as a firefighter. And the reason the story is important is because you learned it's good to face fear, right? So let's just think about that for a second. That message is universal, right? And that's really what you want out of a thesis statement for a paper like this. You want a lesson that everyone can relate to, okay? Realizing that it's good to face your fear is something that everybody can understand. If his thesis statement had said something like, the night I ran into my first burning house as a firefighter, I learned what it takes to put out a fire. That's not as universal, right? Like that doesn't resonate with everybody, okay? If you're an aspiring firefighter, you might be interested in that story. But you don't have to be a firefighter to appreciate the lesson that was learned from this, okay? So once again, we revisit that thesis statement. The night I ran into my first burning house as a firefighter was the night I realized it is good to face fear. Okay? We've got the two things that we need in order for that paper to have total focus. Everything in that paper from this point forward is going to be about that night, and it's going to be working toward facing fear and overcoming it and what that means to that person, right? So basically, we go from somebody who basically looks like this when they started, and now they look like this when it's over. And there's this whole arc that takes place in the story where the person goes through the change. Okay, so for you and your paper, you need to pick, for this assignment, you need to pick 3 different things from your life that you think you could write about. And you need to come up with a thesis statement for each one, okay? And for each one, you're going to write a sentence, you're going to write a thesis statement that tells the reader, what is this story about? In other words, what happened and why is it important to you? What did you learn or realize about yourself or about the world around you? I think that's the best way of putting it, okay? So if you head back over to modules, you will, under assignments for this week, you will find where you can upload. You'll find the page where you upload this assignment. Okay, so you're going to do it on a Word document. That's something that you're going to upload. Okay, And please make sure that you're paying attention to the due dates. Okay, due dates are listed on every assignment. Okay, so once again, under the modules for this week, you're going to find a heading that says assignments. Under assignments, you're going to find thesis statement, and this is where you upload your work. Okay, again, pay attention to the due date. I can't stress that enough. Okay, because it's important for me to get your work on time so that I can give you feedback and we can really pick the best, strongest thesis statement that you have and get this paper started. Okay, so I hope that helped. I'm going to make this document here available so you can download it, you can look at it. This recording is obviously here so that you can watch it as many times as you need to, and I will see you on Canvas.